Welcome, everyone. My name is Stephanie Ivick. I'm the Content Marketing Manager here at eLearning Brothers. We have a really great webinar on instructional design for you today, but first I'll go over a few housekeeping items. This webinar is being recorded. We'll email a copy of the recording out to everyone who registered, so you can keep an eye on your inbox tomorrow for that recording. We are now using Zoom, which is very exciting because we've got some new features, including closed captions. If you want captions, there's a little button at the bottom of your Zoom interface that says live transcript. You can click on that to turn them on. We also have a Q&A panel. So if you have any questions throughout the webinar, just pop them into the questions box. And there is also live chat now, so you can talk to the other attendees, talk about how awesome the presentation is, all the great things you're learning from Brandy, etc. And today we have Brandy Jenkins, Learning Experience Design Manager for our Custom Solutions team at eLearning Brothers. Without further ado, Brandy, I'll turn the time over to you and let you get started.
Hello, everyone. I'm Brandy Jenkins. As Stephanie said, I am the Learning Experience Design Manager for the custom team at the eLearning Brothers. And I thought today that I would share some of the instructional design strategies that can be used to help your learners move up to the next level of mastery. You'll notice as I'm going through these that some of these theories were developed for like nurses and specific fields, but they're really applicable across a lot of different industries. And I think that you'll find some of the tips and strategies useful for helping you to kind of select your strategies or to create your design documents and your design plans for your learning experiences. So as you're going through this, I want you to think about this in terms of a learning experience. It's kind of like a continuing learning journey. It's like continuing the learner's journey to the next level. And I'm going to start by kind of walking through an example with one of our existing clients, Intel, that we've been developing several courses with over the past couple of years. They use kind of this novice to expert strategy with what they call a sales champion program that they developed internally. They are leveraging our services to help them develop the courses needed to provide support for their learners to get to that next sales championship level. And we'll talk about these levels in a minute. For this particular group, the goal was to again help their learners prepare for the performance component of their program. This program is one that they actually had to go and demonstrate performance to a panel that they were meeting specific criteria in order to move up to that next sales champion level. So it's a really unique, really very integrated program into their sales professionals' journey. Where that part of that performance criteria is they're actually having to go back and mentor peers in that previous level to help them get to the next level too. So they're having to kind of give back all along the way. And we'll talk about some of that in a minute as well. So for this, for Intel, we worked with them to create part of like an immersive interactive journey that included features such as adaptive test out. It included real world scenarios with options to pull in a colleague or ask an expert to complete activities as they got more challenging as they progressed to the next level. One of the ways that we tried to really make it relevant to them was to let them choose their own adventures. In some cases, it involved selecting the type of customer that they were working with to make it most relevant to their roles. And we also integrated some light gamification, things like customer value meters that would increase as they're going through these exercises and they're creating more business value for their customer. These were all a part of the learner's journey from that novice level, which was a little bit more intentionally designed to be a little bit more guided to that expert level, which was engaging them in more simulated based scenarios where they're making decisions and they're actually having to perform deep dive discovery sessions with clients, or which are basically kind of like the needs assessment phase in sales, where they're having to have these deep conversations with customers. With that being said, I'll show you a quick demo of some of the work that we've done for them, and you'll notice in it that as we go through it, some of the activities get a little bit more complex. They're getting a little bit more scenario based as we go. You also notice a branding change in it because there was a branding change. So you'll notice a couple of different things going on in the video. So let me go ahead and share that. That video kind of cut off a little bit quickly, so I may come back to that later. One of the things that we didn't see in that video is as it got toward the end, they were allowed to choose, like if they were working with a manufacturing company, they could go down this path and they could actually interact with a manufacturing customer and a sales professional and kind of see both sides of the story and how the conversation played out. So I'll try to see if we can come back to that later and share a little bit more of that. But for now, kind of let's kind of dig into some of the strategies that went into intentionally planning out those learning experiences. First, I want to pause for a second. Does anybody have any questions about anything so far? What are your thoughts as far as what the difference is between your novice and expert learners and how they might approach decision making, and how you might intentionally design a learning experience different for a novice learner versus an expert learner?
And you can put those comments in the chat or the questions panel. We don't have any questions right now as we're going, but I am sure that there'll be more as we start digging in deeper. All right, so Mark says for novices, you need to pace it more slowly and break down skills more. Oh, this is a good one. Novices tend to not know what they don't know.
Right. That's great. All right. So let's break down a little bit of that, and you can keep submitting your responses and we'll get some more in. And Stephanie, you can chime in as well as more come in.
We do have a couple of questions for this course. Did you create new curriculums for all of them, or are they just branching scenarios?
We did a little bit of both. There for this particular project, there were multiple series going on. One was very much like Internet of Things, and it involved multiple courses that are slowly got more complex. The other was like a sales strategy, sales process series that is for like their overall general group for all of their groups. So it was a little bit of like each course, there were multiple courses, and each one did get more complex with for each step, and each one embedded in them, there were some branching scenarios, or even in some of the lower courses, there were like simple scenarios, and then they got more complex as we went. And now we're kind of in the phase where we're doing full simulated branching scenarios with custom feedback by the response that will take them down a different path. So it's a lot more complex. They're a lot more immersed in the kind of the active learning, where they're actually having to complete those complex tasks and having to engage with the customer. I think in one piece of course, there's even an activity where they have to go out and fill out some of the things that they would complete in an application for their next championship level. They have to go through this application process and submit that application to a panel, and it has to be reviewed. So we actually take them through some of those questions in one of our courses.
Okay, great. I'll let you go on, because I think as you're showing the next part of your presentation, you'll kind of answer some of the questions that we have.
All right. So as a couple people have pointed out, the difference between novices and experts is that, novices require more support to be able to form that background knowledge needed to move to the next level. They may need more guidance. They need to be able to have that context to make the decisions, those complex decisions on the job on their own. They've got to be able to somehow form that background knowledge needed. Experts, on the other hand, already have those schemas, so they can quickly make decisions and quickly, perform certain tasks that a novice can't do without more guidance. If you think about how schemas affect the learning process, and that's kind of that. Think of them, if you think of that, schemas in terms of the background knowledge that they need to complete tasks or that they need to make decisions. That's kind of how I think of a schema. Schemas kind of impact how quickly people learn, how quickly they're able to perform tasks on their own, and how they interpret even information. You might find that sometimes a novice learner might interpret a question, like an assessment question, different than an expert learner. A novice learner might say, well, why do we need to answer this in this way, whereas the expert learner automatically knows that why. Cognitive load is a big thing when you're designing your learning journey. You always kind of have to keep that in the back of your mind, because you can reach a point where you have to consider things like the reversal effect. An expert learner is going to be annoyed by simple details that they already know. If they're bogged down by all the simple details and all the background information, you could potentially lose their attention as a learner. One of the strategies that's well known with novice to expert, one of the theories that's well known in terms of novice to expert, is Benner's theory, Benner's novice to expert journey. This was actually developed for nurses. I find this useful, and I actually do fall back to this theory quite a bit when I'm doing design strategy documents, or when I'm planning out a learning experience that takes the learner from beginning to expert level, because it kind of helps me to plot out, to identify activities that would be appropriate for the learners at each level. And we'll get to some of those more details in a second, some of those more detailed activities in a second. So when you look at the context of a novice learner, there's someone that has that minimal textbook knowledge. You think about if you're in school, and you're just learning, you're falling back on that textbook to complete your exercises, or you're studying for your tests. So a novice learner is going to rely on things like policies and procedures a little bit more, job aids. In the context of a learning experience, they're going to need that step-by-step guidance. An advanced beginner is someone who knows the basic rules, but they can apply the information to situations. They can say, okay, in this situation, I need to do X, Y, and Z. But then they may still have a little bit more questions than a novice. You may have to provide extra guidance or extra support for them in some of the more, as situations start to get complex. The confident learner uses rules and reasoning. So they know, actually, now that they're to the point that they know some of the why behind the rules before deciding, what plan to follow. They can kind of start to distinguish different plans that they could follow. But they still, at that point, may also need guidance with some of the more complex situations. And this is kind of these advanced beginner competent. These are where things like strategies like your option to ask an expert or ask a colleague can come in handy in your learning experience, because they're able to go, if they need it, pull that guidance they need to get to the activities completed. Your proficient learner is someone who can identify relevant situations. They have the rules and the reasoning behind, the different decisions that they can make in the past that they could take, but they don't always automatically react to the complex situation or automatically know the answer to a difficult question. They may have to go back and, think about it and process it before they react right away. An expert is someone who's kind of more like, your mentor, your guide, somebody that knows the answer without needing a lot of time to deliberate. And in the medical field, in the nursing field, that's your nurse that's going to be able to, your ER nurse, or somebody that's going to be able to react on call without needing a lot of time to think about what to do next. Myers' individual difference principle is another principle that's commonly used when thinking in terms of the learning journey and of getting the learner to advance to the next level. This, again, is saying that learners with higher levels of expertise use prior knowledge, and they don't need as much guidance, whereas learners with lower levels of expertise are less able to make those decisions on their own. It's basically what we're trying to say here. They need that background context and that background information to be able to make those complex decisions, or they may need to pull in the help of an expert or a guide or a mentor. The expertise reversal effect is something that I mentioned earlier. It's something that you really need to consider with your learners as they're going through their journeys, because if you're throwing a bunch of information at an expert learner that they already know, you're going to lose them before they even, they're going to be kind of come detached from completing the activities. They're going to become bored. You're going to lose their motivation and their attention to that learning experience. Here is where, it's really important to stop and assess your learners. Let them do those knowledge checks or those branching scenarios, really to help them kind of gauge kind of what guidance is needed. And you can use that kind of your feedback from that and your results from that to help you design the next level up learning experiences. This is where I also like to involve the subject matter experts and the learners in my course reviews when I'm designing out a course, because they can give you feedback on, what they'd need to know to complete that activity, and what can be left out, what's too basic for that learning experience. These are kind of an example of a breakdown. If you go out and search the web for novice to expert theories, you'll see a lot of examples of Benner, how Benner breaks down these into kind of a matrix based on the level of activities. As you'll see, even in these charts, that they will include specific learning activities for each level. They'll include like a third column, which I'm getting it ready to get into more detail about, that has specific activities that are appropriate for each level as well. And those can be kind of helpful too as you're making your design strategies and as you're planning out your the flow and the learning experience, the learner's journey. So this kind of summarizes some of what we were just saying. As you get more advanced, you'll see that the expert's decision is a little bit more intuitive and a little bit more quick than a novice learner's decisions. The advanced learner has a little bit more perception of the actions and the goals behind activities than a novice learner does, because they're still kind of learning what actions they need to take and what the goals are behind the activity. As you get more advanced, the decision making also, as I mentioned before, gets a little bit more detached and a little bit more like it's almost like an instantaneous response, like they know how to make those decisions. It's a little bit easier for them to engage in the simulations and some of the more complex performance-based activities without requiring as much support. So something to think about as you're designing a learning journey is that, at some point, everyone is a novice, and over time, they can become accomplished in successfully intervening with groups. And the point that I really wanted to make with this is that a learning journey, such as the one that Intel created, is not something that should be attempted to do without external support, without internal support from your other areas in your company or your team. It's not something that's typically just housed in the e-learning course. There's usually a whole support team that's involved, and that's something to consider as well. Is what types of support are there outside of the e-learning course to help the learners get to that next level? In Intel's case, they have that mentorship program where they've got a system set up where it's a requirement to move up to each level that their peers have to give back to peers that are working on the lower level in order to qualify even to earn that status, that next level status. I think they even have a breakdown of how many hours and things that they have to put into that mentorship, or how many candidates that they have to mentor before they can qualify. They do also, I think in some cases, even provide like different rewards for mentoring more candidates. And I think those are like cash spiffs and things like that for the more that they get involved in, like reviewing our training courses that we create. They get, I think, some kind of rewards for those as well. So that's all built into this external support program. In some cases too, I've been a part of a team where we've actually used team leaders, like a customer service team, where we've used team leaders to be those mentors. And so, even in those team meetings, there'd be support given to them. And in areas that the learners were struggling with, they might have a job aid that was given to them to help them. Or it might be that, we pair a trainer up with someone. We paired a trainer up with a customer service rep that was like struggling in certain areas. And that's how they supported them in getting to that next level. So let me pause for a second here, because I know I just kind of went through that pretty quickly, and see if anybody has any questions.
Sure, Brandy, we do have a couple questions. So how do you solve for the mix of learner types? Like if you have a mix of beginner, novice, expert, would you be including like 2 levels of learning in all of your content? How do you determine what level they're at? Where do you kind of start for something like that?
One way is kind of with an adaptive test out. You could potentially let them test out by even sections, or test out even by topics within a course. If they pass that test out, then they may not need to see that content. The other way is to make certain things optional to learners, like sometimes what we'll do is we'll put in a guide in scenarios. If we don't really know where the learner's at for that scenario, there might be an option to select a guide, like an Ask the Expert, if they need that guidance. If they don't, they might be able to whiz right through that scenario. Another possibility is even to use things like chatbots. That's a little bit more complex as far as your design and development go, but chatbots could potentially even also act as a guide, as an option for the learner to pull assistance in as well if they need it.
Okay, thank you. And then last question, does Section 508 come into play when we're making design decisions for courses like this?
I think absolutely. Section 508 is kind of a whole nother kind of can of worms as far as designing learning experiences. But I think, you can still design your simulations to be 508 compliant. You can still design your performance activities to be 508 compliant. And those are just kind of extra considerations that you have to think about when you're creating your design strategies. It's, things like if you're doing an e-learning course, you want to make sure that the learner can use their keyboard to get through these activities. All those little things that need to be Section 508 compliant. If you're doing like an ILT, like an instructor-led training, you'll want to make sure that, the learner, any resources are accessible, PDFs, Word documents, PowerPoints, things like that, meet those criteria.
Definitely.
But yeah, that's kind of a whole nother can of worms.
Yeah, that's a whole other webinar. We don't have time for that one today.
It's kind of, but yeah, you can still design your activities and your simulations. And I'll get in a second here a little bit more into some specific examples of activities. I mean, even things like if you're doing a simulated software simulations, you could still have a 508 compliant software simulation with the guide in it that they select with the keyboard, that they can tab through with the keyboard and select thing. You can still make those things 508. It's just all in how you look at it.
Yeah. All right. Well, those are all the questions we have right now. So I'll let you get back to it.
All right. So now let's talk a little bit more about some of the specific strategies that you can use to help plan out how you might enable a journey from novice to expert. For novices, again, it's important to be able to communicate clear, achievable goals. That can be. And I'm not a huge fan of, every course having like the flat objective screen in front of it. You can weave those objectives in throughout your course. in a way that the learner still understands that they're clear and achievable. It's just important to make sure that they know what they're doing. They know the what's in it for me and the why it's important, and that you're giving them enough facts and background information that they need to complete any activities, knowledge checks, performance requirements that you have for them to move up to the next level. Novice learners tend to require more specific, more detailed directions for how to complete the required tasks. That's where you may, like if you're doing a gamified activity or a simulation, you may have to provide more prompts for them for how to do things than you might an expert learner who may be more familiar with how to engage in that simulation. An advanced beginner learner, which is the next level up, can kind of try tasks on their own with a little bit more freedom. This is where, like, in the context of a simulation, if you do a show me simulation, you might be able to follow it up with a try it activity that has a little bit less guidance, that they can actually try that task on their own. Now that they've seen the show me software simulation, they can now engage in completing that task on their own. Again, at each level, it's important to continue to let them assess where they're at, and to provide that feedback on why they got what they got wrong and how they can fix it, or what what the correct response would be in some cases. It is recommended with beginners and advanced beginners that feedback be immediate so that they can be correcting their actions along the way. As you're going up the levels, one thing to think about is slowly how you can increase the amount of control that they have over the learning experience. This is kind of doing things like the choose your own adventure path and letting them choose, what path they want to go down. And also, I think the milestone piece is really kind of important, even too, at the earlier levels. You'll see some of these can kind of be intertwined with early levels. The earlier levels, it's milestones that will help them check their performance and do kind of some self-checks along the way. This could be through like an interactive knowledge check. It could be a checklist that, a job aid checklist that they're downloading that they can, kind of do a self-assessment to see where they're at. Or it could be some progress checks that they're going through, that they're kind of prompted to make as they're going as well. Achievement badges, if you're doing gamification, is another way that you can kind of help them gauge their milestones and where they're at. And it's, again, self-assessments are kind of a way that they too can kind of plot out their own learning journey and say, okay, I want to try this activity next, or I need to go talk to so-and-so about this because I'm not, exactly clear on this. I kind of want to learn a little bit more. Those are kind of some of the things that could happen with your self-assessments. As you're advancing at the competent level too, one example that I do have a note on is the importance of your practice opportunities becoming more and more authentic and more real world, because you want them to be able to do those tasks in their setting outside of work, or make those decisions if it's not exactly task-based. Maybe there's a decision or a piece of communication that they need to respond to. it's important to design those activities in a kind of in as authentic of a way. And that's one of the reasons why with Intel, we try to let them do more of the choose your adventure type things where they're even choosing their specific customer, because the way they approach things with different customers was different, and the way that they might have those sales conversations with different customers could change based on where they're at, and based on, the industry and the type of customer. As they become more proficient again, they're able to go through more situational problem solving activities. They're able to analyze, do a little bit deeper of an analysis, and reflect on the tasks that they've completed so far, and kind of plan out what they've done next or what they need to do next. They can make those higher level decisions, and they know at that point too, even what peers to go to obtain feedback if they're kind of working offline, if they're trying to perform these tasks, even in an instructor-led setting or back on the job. They know who they can go to at that point to and get their questions answered as well. The expert decision, the expert learner tends to prefer to use more active, not passive approaches. Now, add a disclaimer here. For each of these levels, I'm kind of more of a fan of using active learning as much as possible all the way along, just because your ultimate goal is mastery, and you want these learners to be able to be actively performing to move to the next level. So we need to use active learning as much as possible. But at the expert level, the decision making should be more rapid. It should be requiring less guidance. They should be, again, interacting with their peers and being mentors for their peers, and reaching out, at that level before them, and kind of being those guides as well. And that's why sometimes we'll have like the ask an expert interactions in courses and learning experiences too, where the learners have the option to go to that expert to be able to pull, that knowledge that they need to get those questions answered. All right. Does anybody have any thoughts or questions or any additional tips or strategies here that they would add on any of these that I kind of just went over?
We don't have any questions right now. I think everybody is absorbing all of the information and just letting it sink in.
All right. So this is a quote that Intel likes to use a lot. They actually use this with their internal groups. If you're a Game of Thrones fan, you'll love this quote. You'll recognize it. When the snows fall and the white winds blow, the lone wolf dies, but the pack survives. Basically, what this means is that, again, this journey does not have to be something that you're the only one trying to promote. It should be something that you are pulling in support from wherever possible, and that you're planning that is intentionally designed in a way that learners have that support that they need to move up to their next level of expertise outside of, the e-learning course or whatever instructor-led course that you are creating. If you're thinking in the context of a whole learning journey, let's kind of make sure that the stakeholders that are needed are pulled in to provide that support that the learners needed. And I know that getting them on board can be a challenge. Some of the ways that I think some of the strategies that Intel uses with that as well is, again, they'll sometimes use cash spiffs to help get them on board. And those are usually like gift cards and things like that. Or they might use they use it as part of their requirement for like the gold level, which is their highest level for them to mentor and to be involved. For their executive stakeholders, usually they found that they were excited about it. They were excited about being involved in the program because the objectives in the program was so clearly defined to help their sales professionals get to the next level, and it was so aligned with the company's goals that their executives wanted to be on board and they wanted to support the program as much as they could. So with that being said, this is kind of the last of what I have. Does anyone else have any thoughts or questions or strategies that they might use to help their learners get up to the next level?
We did have one question just came in. Do you find that you need to construct different self-assessments for beginners, proficients, and experts? Or does the same one work?
I do find, I think so. With beginners, I do find that they need to be a little bit more detailed and a little bit more specific as far as, like, I may have to go back and ask them very specific, actionable questions that they can say, how would you plan to do X, Y, and Z, or how can you apply X, Y, and Z to your role, or whereas an expert learner, it could kind of go either way with expert learners. Expert learners, you could potentially have them make their own performance plan in some cases or design their own learning journey. I worked for a company a while back that in my first ID role, actually, that we had developed this whole blueprint plan where they had to actually fill out a whole document planning out, what they wanted to do as far as their learning for the next year. And it was part of a performance plan. And there were some incentives tied to it if they met that, if they achieved their learning goals. For experts too, I think that, it's a little bit more of, I do find, like, if you're planning a learning journey, they tends to get a little bit more complex as far as connecting them with the resources too. If you're working on an internal program, you may have to find like a external courses or things like that, or it might be like an executive level course that they go outside and take and come back in and share with their peers, if that makes any sense. Because they may not, unless you're working in a large corporation, they may not have those internal resources to help them. They might have to kind of go on the outside.
Yeah, definitely. I think those are all the questions that we have right now. Anyway, if anyone has last minute question, feel free to pop it in there. As I mentioned, this is being recorded, so we will send the recording out to everyone tomorrow. So if you want to review anything, etc., you will get that in your emails. And Brandy, do you have one last slide for me, perhaps?
Maybe. Yes, it is my personal contact information. If you guys have questions, you are also welcome to reach out to me if you have specific questions about designing learning experiences. I know I didn't get into a ton of detail about strategies, but I can probably point you to some additional resources as well.
Yes, and I'm going to pop a link in the chat just to our Custom Solutions webpage. As I mentioned earlier, Brandy is part of our Custom Solutions team. So if you want to connect with our team, you can schedule a free consultation to talk to them about your training needs, what you're looking for, and they would be more than happy to help you create a custom solution, a custom learning experience for your organization and help you out with creating some awesome training. Thank you so much for your time today, Brandy, and thank you everyone for joining us. This is our last webinar before the holidays, so I hope that everyone has a happy, safe, relaxing holiday, and we will see you all back in January.